So my name's Mo Manclang. I work with, I'm one of the facilitators of the Alliance for Just Philadelphia. I also work with the Philadelphia Area Cooperative Alliance. Um, and I'm just gonna do a little bit of table setting for us. Um, uh, as we all know, hundreds of thousands of people have been mobilized around the Black Lives Matter movement. And part of that mobilization has manifested in the form of demands around how our city funds are allocated and where they support our Black communities. So the Alliance for Just Philadelphia and the Campaign for a Just Philly Budget came together to host this shared space where we can learn together about how the budget works, and so we can all stay in movement together and continue to push our city toward a more just budget. So tonight we'll hear from organizers who will bring us together to help us understand budgets as an expression of political power, why we need to be doing this work, to move us toward a shared analysis of the budget process, to talk about how we mobilized during this cycle, and finally, what's to come this fall. How will we keep working, and how will we keep doing this work together? Because it certainly does not stop just because a budget has been passed. So I think most importantly, we'll also hear some stories from folks who have and continue to be impacted by the Philadelphia city budget to help us ground our analysis and remind us of why we do this work. Towards the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A. We want to build relationships with one another, so we encourage you to use the chat. And I'll just wrap up with a few reminders. We are recording this webinar in all 3 languages. So if you're uncomfortable being recorded, you can simply turn off your video and keep it off for your privacy. Again, I'll ask people to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can share your name, any organizations you're with, any questions that you might be coming to this space with. And just so you all know, we will share a follow-up, including a recording and the slides for the webinar if you have registered for the event. So I think that's all of the housekeeping things. So with that, I will pass it off to Brittany, who's going to kind of kick off our learning together.
Great. Thank you, Mo. Thanks for everybody for being in attendance. Like they said, I know a lot of people are on Zoom all day, so thanks for hopping on. And hopefully I will get to see your questions after I get done the presentation, but feel free to ask them as I go. So yeah, I'm gonna walk through a section on understanding budgets as expression of political power. Next slide, please. Budgets are political tools, and some refer to them as moral documents because they put into action the priorities of our elected officials. And these decisions, they're not made in a vacuum, right? So political contributions and lobbying dollars are spent to influence the outcome of city budgets. Some of that money comes from residents like us, community organizations that we might be a part of, but a lot of the larger contributions come from corporations who want to see their interest in local politics and policies. So these structures then get baked into our budgets, into our laws, and that makes room for austerity, and it limits the funding we have to our communities. Next slide, please. So this is a cycle that we call financialization. And this process, it siphons money away from our public budgets and it puts it into the hands of corporations. And you see these highlighted boxes. This shows how austerity fits into this cycle. So when the ultra wealthy and the corporations don't pay their fair share in taxes, we don't actually have the money that we need in our city budget. But we do see them working really hard to protect their interests, and often that comes in the form of policing. But in this cycle, our needs fall by the wayside. Next slide. So without bold intervention from all of us, people, the budget process mirrors the same racist, classist structures that we see in our city and that we see in our country. Historically, budgets have reinforced racist and misogynistic policymaking by painting families, working families, and mothers, especially in families of color, as drains on our budget because we use these public services. And we've seen this through terminology like the welfare queens, and that was made popular by Reagan. So you see some of those images there, and I'm getting the hand signal to slow down. Is that right? Okay, great. And let me know when I can keep moving. Cool. So the other thing that we see happen is that this criminalizes poverty, and it places a heavy emphasis on this idea of an ideal taxpayer, someone who isn't reliant on government and more closely aligned with the interests of the ultra wealthy and corporations, often white men. But realistically, that's all fake, right? Next slide, please. I'm returning back to this cycle. In the end, the ultra wealthy corporations and the systems they created to protect them, like policing, are the true drains on our budgets because they don't pay their fair share, and that harms us in the process. And police explicitly harm us in the process. Next slide, please. So let's just take a quick look to see exactly where our cities spend their money. And we're just gonna do this quick quiz. Some of you have probably been on a webinar where I've done something similar before, but throw your answers in the chat, and if you already did this, don't cheat, okay? All right, so question number 1, which department received a larger increase last year? And you can just throw it in the chat. Question 2, which department saw a larger decrease last year? Question 3, which department saw the greatest increase last year? And question 4, which departments, plural, above will see increases in the current budget? All right, they're coming in. And we can go to the next slide, please. So you can quickly check your answers, and I'm just gonna look in the chat quickly. Yes, yes, yes. The last one got a few of you, but only because it was a plural question. So I think it's important to recognize that even without doing some technical dive, most, if not everyone, knew how the city spent its money. And it's because our budget is a living document, and it's reflected in how we experience our cities. Next slide, please. But let's just get technical for 1 second. The budget is a plan of expected money coming in and expected expenses going out or spending. And each of these, and this is based on a fiscal year. The fiscal year begins on July 1st and ends on June 30th. The most important thing about the fiscal year is it dictates how we intervene in the budget process. So there is an operating budget and a capital budget. The capital budget shows the plan for long-term infrastructure, improvements, facilities, equipment. And this is just a note for any researchers out there. If you're looking for policing, okay, I will slow down. Just give me a thumbs up. Cool. If you're looking for policing technology and equipment, you may want to look into a capital budget. But what you see over here on the screen is actually the operating budget, and this shows the spending for the current fiscal year. Our budget is also made up of different funds. This is a picture of our largest fund, the general fund. And this is where the most money from our tax dollars gets dumped into. And I can share a how-to guide on how to read the budget, and I'll make sure I do that. All right, next slide, please. So let's just look at our top expenses. Our top expenses are employee benefits, police, fire, and debt service. So we use taxpayer dollars to pay back the city's debt. Sounds like what it is, debt service. And that means that we're paying back Wall Street because Wall Street owns our debt, and that's one of our top expenses. So we're paying them back as if they need more money, right? But I don't think anybody on this call thinks that Wall Street needs more money. Another top expense is policing. And the city has bought into this age-old idea that we can police our way out of poverty, and that's just not the case. And there needs to be a shift. So if we're looking to fund a just city budget, we need to, one, defund the police, and two, tax the rich. And I'm just pausing for the interpreters. Great. Okay, so, we see how we spend our money, and we recognize it's not how we want to spend our money. And that shows that this is not a just budget. Like I said before, we understand what needs to happen in our communities. We already have that understanding, and we need to see that reflected in our budgets. So our current budgets aren't just. A just budget, it raises progressive revenue, that's taxes on the rich, corporations, and it cuts regressive expenses. That's policing and payments to Wall Street. Next slide, please. Our most recent budget, it was not bold. It was regressive. So even though people need assistance and relief now more than ever, Mayor Kenney proposed what he even called painful cuts in what I call the Corona budget. And that slashed over $300 million to our public goods and services. And these cuts hurt. As many of you know, far better than I do, seasonal staff were laid off from city departments like the library, community programs were cut, and those are the things that we need to not just meet our basic needs, but to thrive. But there were no cops laid off, and there was a small cut to the police department, and that only paid lip service, honestly, to our demand to defund the police. Bold is taxing the rich who hoard the resources and redistributing regressive expenses like policing to those of us who need it the most. So hopefully I can answer more questions in the chat, and also I will make sure to share a how-to guide on how to actually look through and dig through the city budget on your own. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brittany. That was so much information. I'm really looking forward to digging into the how-to guide. So next up, we're going to hear from Flan Park, a city worker.
Hello. Thank you so much to everyone who took time to be here tonight. I'm just going to take about 5 minutes to tell about the impact that this budget has had on city work in 2 different departments. So since 2017, I have worked in the Free Library of Philadelphia in various seasonal positions. On the 1st of June, the city of Philadelphia eliminated 454 positions, most of which were seasonal and temporary, over half of which, or nearly half of which, came from the Free Library. So myself and all of my colleagues were laid off. And I've since obtained a different job with the library, but most people that I know who were laid off did not. So really quick, before I tell any other details, I want to give you an overview of just like what that layoff looked like. 454 is the official number. We know there were hundreds of more workers in parks who were simply never activated this summer, and the city is not counting those folks as laid off, but that's not true. But of the 454, 72% of those workers were non-white workers. 58% of those laid off were identified as women on their payroll record, and 52% of those laid off were Black Philadelphians. And this was a budget that, even with the cuts, the mayor was calling a racial justice budget, a community justice budget. I think even just by looking at those raw numbers, you can see that that's a lie. So now I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about our experience of that layoff in the library. Now, we laid off from the Free Library somewhere north of, I think, 240 workers. And so we're returning to service at a phased schedule starting next week with 25% fewer workers than we had at the beginning of last fiscal year. And the city is expecting libraries to perform additional work in the form of these student access points and other programs that are community facing and sound really good when they're packaged for the news. But what it comes down to is that the city is demanding more work from fewer workers. And that's not just, especially when you consider, again, a majority of the workers who do the hardest, least celebrated work in the library are Black Philadelphians. So since the spring and really earlier, there have been a lot of organizing efforts inside the library to counter-propose these plans. We've had militant Black-led activism inside the library demanding more and better from our leadership. And most of you on this call are probably aware that our director of 10 years resigned a few weeks ago. And there's been more less visible shakeups in the administration since then. But it hasn't gone far enough to really provide safety for workers as we return, and also to provide safe and accessible and equitable service to our community patrons, especially when it comes to technology. And so there are continuing efforts to renegotiate reopening with the city, and that's being done by the concerned Black workers of the Free Library, as well as our unions, our AFSCME unions, especially Local 2187, which represents most library workers. Within the sanitation department, there has also been a tremendous amount of unrest since March. That's a workforce that is 80% Black. Most of those workers are Black men. And we've seen throughout this crisis, those workers have been funding the purchase of their own safety equipment because the city does not prioritize the safety of the Black men who work for us. There's been multiple outbreaks among the teams that collect the refuse every day. There's been dozens of people out of work at a time. I think at one point the number of confirmed corona cases was over 100. That has steadily increased throughout the year. Meanwhile, Republicans on council have threatened privatization of that workforce, and the city has responded by activating a number of laborers off the list, but on a temporary basis. They can be laid off at any time. They're not eligible for union benefits. So that's just two of the many departments that make up city government here in Philadelphia. There's over 30,000 people that live in the city, that work for you, that work for us every single day. And what we've seen overwhelmingly is that these budgets do not prioritize the safety of workers. And when workers' safety is not prioritized, community service suffers. So what we are continuing to organize around is for government to stop stripping away jobs and services and asking for more and extraordinary levels of work from fewer and fewer workers at unacceptable pay. Sanitation workers and other essential workers received, I think, like 2 weeks of corona incentive pay. And after that 2-week period was gone, that stopped immediately. And sanitation workers have not received hazard pay since then. It's not in their contract. and this city doesn't feel obligated to them. So we want an end to that style of government, better jobs and better services rather than more work with fewer jobs. What we want instead is for this to be a city that's led by its workers, because its workers do take the lead. I've seen this in the library, and I'm sure it's true in other departments. We know how the work is done at a level that is much more detailed and true than that which is known by administration. That's elected administration and non-elected administration. So we would like those with power in the city to follow the lead of workers and allow us to enact safe and equitable plans for the people that we serve. Where do you come in if you're not working for the city, if you're just a resident or a voter or a concerned citizen? I think it's your job to join us as we rally the entire city behind a mass movement in support of city workers and for the public good. These jobs and these services are not a gift from above. I don't think they should depend on corporate largesse, which they so often do. And if we want a city that works for everybody, we have the power to win it together. So workers are leading. Please follow. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you so much, Fawn, for being here, and also just for all of the work that you're doing. So with that, we're gonna shift over to Stan Shapiro, who's gonna talk a little bit about how Philly's budgeting process works.
And that comes from Philadelphia's Home Rule Charter, enacted in 1951. And the key...
Stan, I'm sorry, would you mind starting over real quick? We just
okay.
missed just the first 10 seconds or so.
I'm going to talk about the legal structure within which budgets get enacted. Everybody hear me? Is that okay? Okay, all right. And that comes from the Philadelphia Home Rule Charter, enacted in 1951. It had the key objective of sharply limiting council's budgetary powers, which had resulted in numerous scandals prior to 1951, when the city was run entirely by the Republican Party. So the result of the changes in 51 is a system called lump sum budgeting. So could we go to the next slide? And that shows what the actual budget ordinance looks like that council adopts every year. You'll see that it appropriates money to departments like in this case, you've got a page that shows the police department, the streets department, the public health department. It only appropriates money into three buckets for each of those departments under the charter. Those are personnel services, materials, supplies and equipment, and debt service. However, the mayor can change those categories, and you can see that there are some different categories in these departments. But the allocations are to broad categories of spending. None of them specify any purpose for which the funds must be spent, such as healthcare, social services, housing rehab, or anything else. Just these big buckets that pretty much are the ones that the mayor picks. There are workarounds to these limits, basically by creating special funds like the Housing Trust Fund, but primarily the budget that council gets to adopt is this lump sum budget. The mayor does publish a detailed budget which itemizes in more specific amounts how much he intends to spend within departments for specific purposes and uses. And so I'd like to see the next slide, which shows what that looks like. And so here you'll see such things as specific line items for Philadelphia Authority for Industrial Development. And all the way on the right, you'll see a very narrow identification of the purpose for each one of those allocations. But even within that, for instance, you'll see line item 250, a budget item of $4 million for economic stimulus. What does that mean? It doesn't really tell us. But still, there's a lot more detail in that budget document than in the legally binding budget document, which is the lump sum budget, which we just took a look at. On the revenue side of the budget, the mayor also has considerable discretion. As I've shown, the mayor has terrific discretion within identifying specific expenditures in the spending side of the budget. So on the revenue side, the mayor has considerable power as well. For instance, the mayor's estimate of revenue in a particular fiscal year is binding on council. Technically, council can enact whatever constitutional taxes it wants. However, the mayor can lowball his or her, of course, it's always been his so far, estimate of the revenues that any of those measures may bring in, so that if a council passes a tax which it hopes will bring in a lot of money, the mayor can simply say, no, logic and facts don't matter. I'm going to say this revenue item is going to bring in 20 million. You say it's 100. What I say goes. And if it's only 20, that is going to make it much harder for council to fully fund its priorities if the mayor doesn't agree. Apart from the mayor's power over revenue estimates, there are other limitations on council's power to enact taxes. Please bring up the next slide, please. One of those limits is a constitutional limit, and it's basically what is normally called the uniformity clause of the Constitution. You see it here, it's just a few words, but it's a powerful limit that all taxes shall be uniform upon the same class of subjects. What that basically means in real life is that rates have to be flat. That's why we have a flat wage tax, because, I'm sorry.
Could you just slow down a little bit? Thanks.
Okay, I'll try. Yes, tax rates generally have to be flat, no matter how much wages you bring in. Your tax rate is going to be around 3%, which is the last rate that council enacted. $1 million a year, $10,000 a year, doesn't matter. The rate is going to be flat, and that's because of the Constitution. Also, the things that council can tax are also limited. The next slide, please. This is the main taxing statute that council operates under. It's called the Sterling Act, and it says that council can only tax those things which the state does not tax. For that reason, we have a wage tax, not an income tax, because the state taxes all classes of income. It doesn't separate out wages, so we have the power to tax wages, but not other kinds of income. Notwithstanding all of that, council does have some progressive tax options. For instance, this year, we urged council to pass a personal property tax, which is a tax on wealth, directly on wealth. It's a tax on stocks and bonds. We have the power to tax that because there's a separate statute on that. So even though there have been state taxes on that, there's a specific statute which says that the city can also impose a tax on it. Not that incredibly progressive in the scheme of things, because that same statute said that the tax rate on stocks and bonds cannot be any higher than 0.004%, meaning that for every $1,000 of stocks and bonds subject to the tax, the amount that can be levied on that is only $4. $1,000 of stocks and bonds, we can only impose a tax of $4. And also, with respect to that, if your bonds and stocks are worth $1,000, your tax rate is 0.004%. If it's $1 billion, it's also 0.004%. That is, if council even had the guts to enact that tax at all, it has not had the guts to do so far. It does have the power to do it. There are some similar taxes with a slight progressive aspect to them. For instance, the gross receipts tax, which is a tax on all receipts of businesses, somewhat progressive because it taxes income from that are collected by businesses that are totally located outside the city. So Alaska salmon that is sold into Philadelphia is taxed under the gross receipts tax. It's not only a tax on small local businesses. We suggested that that tax rate be increased. Council refused to do that, but that's a potential source of revenue which would not only fall on small Philadelphia businesses. So let's go to slide 21, which is the process by which council passes a budget. It starts in February or March when the mayor delivers a budget proposal to Philadelphia City Council. It then moves to council's hearings on the budget about 2 weeks later. By mid-June, council will take that budget proposal in the form that you saw before, that lump sum budget. It amends it, passes any tax bills that it chooses to tax by July 1st. The mayor has a chance to either sign or veto that budget. If the mayor vetoes the budget, he or she must do that within 2 weeks. The mayor has another week to decide whether to veto that budget. And if vetoed, council has another week to decide to override any of those vetoes. And then we're done for another year. Apart from transfer ordinances, I don't really have time to get into transfer ordinances that can modify the budget somewhat during the year. But that's about it. There is also, do I have another minute or am I done?
We're running a little bit late, but if you want to wrap up real quick, that's fine.
I just want to say that the budget process actually starts before the mayor delivers the budget. And that's something that we may want to get into as activists because the departments in the city deliver estimates of what they want to spend in the middle of the year to the finance department. Typically, that's all behind closed doors. It doesn't have to be. Hopefully, we can begin to get involved in that process at an earlier time with the process of developing the budget before it's delivered to council. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that anybody has about anything that I said or any other questions. But those are the basics of the city budget process and what's in the budget.
Thank you so much, Stan. Really appreciate you sharing all of this knowledge. There's so much depth here. It's really great to see all of your questions. Please keep them coming. We will have Q&A at the end. We won't have a ton of time for it, so anything that we don't get to during the meeting, we'll try to figure out how to do a follow-up if we're able to. So I'm gonna keep us moving along. Next, we're gonna hear a story from Antoine Little. He's a sanitation worker and a member of the 215 People's Alliance.
Hello, everybody. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Sorry, I have the mask on. I'm at the hospital with my wife. Um, so I've been around for 21 years with the city. Most recently, I was the business manager for the local for 6 years, and I was a union rep for 14 years prior to that. So I have somewhat of, a little more experience than the average sanitation worker in terms of what we've been going through as of recent. Like the gentleman spoke on, I apologize, I don't remember his name, but um, as he spoke on earlier, the department recently hired 120 temporary workers, which is something that myself and the current leadership of the union wholeheartedly oppose. We oppose that because those are permanent jobs that won't come in to the department. We have, as of recent, I believe that I don't have the actual numbers, but our numbers have began to decline in terms of the COVID. But unfortunately, because of the impact of more people being home and them generating more trash, that is part of the process, part of the problem as to why we're still behind in terms of collections. We recently, the number, like he said earlier, the number was, we were at 100, close to over 100 people that, well, the number was actually 30 that actually had contacted the COVID, but through contact tracing, that number shot up over 100 people. The department, in terms of PPE gear, we had in the beginning, we wasn't getting the proper gear that we needed. We weren't getting, our vehicles clean because we work in confined spaces. In terms of our people that are in collections, they are on trucks that require 3 people to a truck. So there was the questions of, is why do we still have to get into vehicles with 3 with no kind of separation, no distancing or anything like that. So that's why the numbers were spiking when it came to the contact tracing. I guess, like, for for me, the most troubling part is that, like with these temp workers, when they say they're going to allow them, so in the paperwork that they gave them, they said you will be considered, and I'm using my air quotes, you will be considered for full-time employment. But if you're already telling us that there's already a budget deficit coming into the new fiscal year, which began July 1, now we're still in the deficit in this new budget. How can you promise these temp workers that you're going to be able to hire a couple of them off of that list? But then, as Councilman O'Neill put out this letter where he said he was recommending that private companies come in and assist with the collection of this trash. That I'm sure everybody on this call understands that that is a very serious problem, and it's a very serious problem because in my 21 years, and I'm going back as far as I can remember from the people that taught me this job and my mentors, we have never had private companies come in here and do our work.
Antoine, we just
Once, yeah, my
oh, there
phone
you go.
had rung, and okay, I'm back. So
Yeah.
once private companies come in, there's no getting rid of them. They will begin to bite away at what little, they'll bite away at the work that we do until there's nothing left for public employees to do. So, I mean, I strongly oppose the temp workers. I strongly oppose the private work, and the impact on the budget. I mean, our budget. I mean, we're working every weekend, so I know the streets department budget. I know we're like way surpassed. We have way surpassed, what our ordinary budget would be, and because we're past it, they haven't hit us yet with layoffs, but I think they're coming. They'll try to. I mean, we were at one point, we were 3,500 members strong. We're down to last number I checked was like 1,700 or a little less than that. So we're doing more with half the workforce. So if they feel as though that they can do it again and put more work, that's more work on the workforce, but that's less money that the city has to come up with in order to, you know, pay for benefits, pay for wages, pay for pensions, the whole 9 yards. These are things that the department know that they can't, they won't have to pay. Or I don't think, and I'm just being honest, I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think that it would happen under the Kenny administration. But I do believe that the next mayor that comes in, this will have a big impact. Now, me personally, some of this, in my opinion, lies on our union leadership. And I'm not talking about the local leadership. I'm talking about the council leadership. I believe a lot of the things that have happened negatively to the 33 membership, I think that it's a direct result of the current leadership. But it all plays hand in hand, because you need the leadership of the union to work with the leadership of the city in order to get certain things. Why is it keep, can y'all hear me? Just a nod. Okay, cool. Thanks, Brian. Okay. I- Throughout this entire process, to be honest, like I said, I just recently went back to work last May, and I kind of took a step back to kind of just watch and see what happened, and watch all of this play out. And as of recent, I've began to become vocal again in this process, because I see the direction that it's heading in, and I see that we're headed in a path that it's going to have a negative impact on the members of Local 427, as well as all of the other departments. Because, like, I don't know, I'm sure you have all seen that there's issues going on in the prisons up on State Road with safety concerns. There are issues going on, as he spoke, to the library, and there are other issues that are going on in other departments that haven't come to the forefront in terms of the media for whatever reason. But there are a lot of different issues that are going on, and I believe it's a direct result of the employees are being tired. Like, for myself, I work 7 days. I usually say 8 days a week. I work 8 days a week, and I'm working 12, 13, 14 hours a day. And, the money is good, but it takes a toll on your body. It takes a toll on your family, because you're not there with your family. So it overall, and it's not just me, it's everyone within sanitation. And I believe for all of the other departments that are directly affected by this process, they're having a direct result of this too. I heard the gentleman speak on the hazardous pay that we were paid for 2 weeks. I mean, we weren't notified from the city about the money was going to stop within 2 weeks. We weren't notified from the council, the leadership of the council. We weren't notified of that. We were notified when we saw the civil service regulation, and the civil service regulation said that it was slated to end on this particular date. And I really believe, well, I know, not I believe, I know that that had a negative impact on the workforce. So, I mean, with that, I hope that the information that I was able to, because I can go on and on and on, I'm sorry, but I'm hoping that with that little bit of information that I gave, I hope that it can help out in this process of what you guys are trying to do.
Thank you so much, Antoine. We really appreciate you sharing your story, and giving us that perspective from the sanitation side. Thank you so much. So we're gonna keep on moving. Next up, we are going to hear from Brian Mercer from Movement Alliance Project, and he's going to talk about the mobilization in this year's budget cycle.
And Brian,
Great.
before you start, can I just give everyone a reminder, the speakers especially, to keep it slow for the interpreters? Thank you so much.
Sounds great. Thanks, Mo. It's been great hearing everyone. Like Mo was saying, I'm Brian Mercer, director of the Movement Alliance Project, which is a member group of the Alliance for a Just Philly. And I want to highlight some of the actions that were taken around the budget this past year, because in my 12 years being a part of organizing in Philadelphia, I truly have never seen a mobilization like the one that happened this past spring around our city's budget. And like Britt was sharing earlier, budgets really are political documents, and our social movements used our political power this past spring to demand change to this budget, change so that it didn't, to stave off the austerity agenda that's trying to balance the budget shortfalls of the pandemic on the backs of Black, brown, and working class people in this city. So the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia was created and started back in 2018 to try to push for deeper coordination of Philadelphia's social movements in an effort to push a transformative agenda for all Philadelphians and to hold our elected officials accountable. Fast forwarding to 2020, and you could switch to the next slide, we were beginning to prepare for budget battles in front of council when the coronavirus hit. And we pivoted to create something called the Philadelphia People's Bailout, a document that put out a movement vision that we talked to the 30 organizations in the Alliance for a Just Philadelphia to create, has been supported by 35 other organizations across our city. And this document puts out a movement vision for how to respond to this crisis. Next slide, you can do. After March, Alliance members were really in the thick of leading campaigns to protect the safety net of working families in Philly from being slashed by this austerity agenda. So groups like the Women's Community Revitalization Project and ACT UP and the Coalition for Affordable Communities fought for the Housing Trust Fund to remain funded. Others like One Pennsylvania and Reclaim Philadelphia pushed for renters protections to stave off the eviction crisis. And groups like Juntos and Viet Lead led campaigns to maintain legal counsel for immigrants so the budget cuts wouldn't also drive the deportation machine. Next slide. So then through the leadership of some of the Alliance members like Philly Power Research and Neighborhood Networks, and others like the Campaign for a Just Philly Budget, Jobs with Justice, and the Our City, Our Schools Coalition, a group formed that took a real look at what could be the progressive revenue that could get us out of this crisis. And they pushed for the things that Stan was speaking to earlier, taxing the wealth of the rich, like the stocks that have skyrocketed during this pandemic, and ending the 10-year tax abatement, which has allowed for major developers to continue construction without contributing to the public health and education needs of our city. Next slide. We also saw the artist community take direct aim at the budget proposals, the budget's proposal to completely eliminate the city's commitment to the arts. And groups like the Artists Coalition for a Just Philadelphia made the direct link to how the city turning back on this commitment would harm young people and Black and brown people in the city, right? And when George Floyd was killed on May 25th, folks throughout Philadelphia took to the streets in the thousands. and groups like the Black Philly Radical Collective, Amistad Law Project, Reclaim Philadelphia, Socialist Alternative, and Party for Socialism and Liberation made really the smart decision to call for a response from our elected leaders that did more than reform, reforms that end up empowering the police by investing more money and resources in policing, and instead calling for a defunding of the police and investing in public safety that does more than rely on police in our communities. And one of the things we were able to do at MAP through our project Philly We Rise is amplify that call by directing people to directly message city council members. And we heard that city council members have received, in the matter of 2 weeks, 7,000 messages in their inboxes talking about this budget, demanding a defunding of the police. And for nearly every day throughout the month of June, in the final weeks of the budget negotiation, people marched in the face of tear gas and extreme policing on 676, or what happened to passerbys on 52nd Street. People testified by the hundreds in Zoom hearings, wrote dozens of letters to the editor. And you can go to the next slide. A group of people even saw that behind the scenes, the city's managing director, Brian Abernathy, was playing a central role in undermining demands for a progressive budget. They staged a sit-in at his office and were arrested alongside journalists by the counterterrorism squad. But no more than 3 weeks after those arrests and after that action, Brian Abernathy resigned. And now Philly is going to have a new managing director and new conditions for fighting with the mayor around the budget. So we took action, and what would be, and we're going to hear in a minute why that action mattered and all the things that came from that action. But I want us to also recognize that action had limits, and that's why we're doing this debrief, so that we get smarter about it for the next time around. So I would love to hear and take a minute, and you can go to the next slide in the chat. Actually, one more slide. Great. If people can take a second, share in the chat, what was an action you were a part of fighting for a just budget in our city? Take a minute, share that in the chat. Pilot's campaign with Jobs with Justice, writing city council people, contacting city council members. All right, that's awesome. So I'm gonna pass it, keep those coming in the chat. It's great to hear, and I'm gonna pass it back to Mo.
Thank you so much, Brian. And it's really, really inspiring just to see the chat flooding with the actions that everybody took. So thank you for participating in that. We're gonna keep it moving to talk about the results, like what happened at the end of this budget process. And we're gonna hear from Peter Cuddy and Emma Borbor.
Hey everyone, I'm Emma Borbor, and I work for Women's Community Revitalization Project and the Coalition for Affordable Communities. I get to talk a little bit about one of the bright spots of the budget fight, which was protecting the Housing Trust Fund, and I'm excited to do that. So first, I just want to give a very quick background. Importantly, what is the Housing Trust Fund? Important to know what it is to be excited about saving it. So the Housing Trust Fund.
Emma,
Oh, yeah.
sorry, could you just slow down a little? Yeah, for the interpreters. Thank you.
I'm going to go too fast. All right. So the Housing Trust Fund, or sorry, should I still pause for them?
Yeah, I think you're good now. You can just speak slowly going forward. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try my best. So the Housing Trust Fund provides funding to create and preserve affordable, accessible housing. It funds home repairs for low-income homeowners. It provides adaptive modifications for people with disabilities so they can stay in their homes or get into homes. And it also provides rental and down payment assistance. So in 2019, the year before this fight, the Coalition for Affordable Communities secured a commitment from the mayor to put $100 million in the Housing Trust Fund over 5 years. But then when Kenny had to redo his budget due to COVID-19, he proposed cutting all of year two, this budget that we're talking about today, all of year two of that commitment, which was about $16 million. So the Housing Trust Fund serves the Philadelphia residents who were already being hit hardest by COVID-19, people with disabilities and families of color with some of the lowest incomes in the city. So deciding to cut the funding for the Housing Trust Fund was a callous and dangerous decision at a time when people needed to stay home to be safe. So we knew that that a lot of city council was with us. So we were able to pull off an inside-outside strategy and mobilize to stop these cuts. And when if you go back to the next slide, when the uprisings happened, we updated our messaging to include the police budget in our work as well, and that's why we did this action with the body bags, because the case was very clear. If you're going to increase the police budget and decrease funding for housing, you're going to see more deaths. It's a deadly budget. As a result of that mobilizing, and as in partnership with the uprising in the streets that we saw, we actually won even more. We won back even more than was originally committed to the Housing Trust Fund. So City Council put $20 million in fiscal year 2021 to the Housing Trust Fund. We obviously shouldn't have to keep fighting for funding that was already committed. But this was the fight that was in front of us, and it was really important that we won because this funding has real impact on people's day-to-day lives. I'll end with that. So this funding will enable at least 150 people to transition out of nursing homes. A lot of people with disabilities have to live in nursing homes because they can't afford housing that's accessible to them. And that's one of the most dangerous places to be during a pandemic. So 150 people will be able to transition into housing they can afford. It'll enable at least 1,000 low-income homeowners to make repairs so that they can stay in their homes, in the homes that they can afford. It'll help produce about 100 new affordable rental units. So that's 1.5 times what there would be without winning back this funding. And then we also made sure that the eviction prevention project was fully funded, which provides legal representation, financial counseling, and other resources to tenants facing eviction. And in Philly, those are disproportionately Black women.
So we're going to move into our final story of the night, and we're going to hear from Kris Henderson from Amistad Law Project. Kris, are you there?
Okay, yeah. I was like, I can't unmute myself. Hi, I'm Kris from Amistad Law Project. I use they, them pronouns. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us for this lengthy Thursday night situation. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what we wanted, which was defunding the police. A number of folks have talked to you about what happened, sort of like how we didn't get that. Just to tell you one last time, we started out asking for, or we turned that demand of defunding the police into, yeah, you can hear these cats, into asking for, or demanding for City Council to not increase the budget with the proposed 14 million, which then turned into 19 million. And pretty quickly, council and the mayor capitulated and said, okay, yeah, there's thousands of people in the streets. We're getting calls, we're getting emails. We're not going to give the police $19 million more dollars. I will say hi to these cats. But then what happened, and you might have seen that $33 million decrease, that $33 million cut, but what actually happened was that they didn't get the $19 million more that they wanted, and then $14 million was just kind of shifted over in the form of like crossing guards from the police to being under the managing director's office. So this is not defunding the police. This is not what we demanded. This is not what folks across the country and across the city have been demanding. I'm going to go slower. I see that motion. It's a long night, y'all, and a long day on Zoom.
You're great.
And I really do appreciate all of you bearing with us late at night. The important thing about a budget, and the reason that we're calling for defunding the police, is because the city does not have an infinite amount of money. We saw that number, like the $4.8 billion budget. If we keep spending $700 million plus on police, we're not going to be able to spend enough money on arts and libraries and community centers and parks, the things that actually make our communities stronger, and when they are stronger, safer. As you also heard, since Mayor Kenney has been in office, the police department has gotten $120 million more. That's been the increase to that yearly budget. Meanwhile, we're still in this moment in the city where we have an unprecedented number of shootings, of homicides. It's clear that giving more money to the police is actually not making us safer. What we need is something entirely different. Instead of giving the police $700 million plus, what if we gave even $1 million to something like a violence interrupter program? To these things that actually, instead of hoping that the police find whoever shot someone after the fact, people who are actually trying to prevent that from happening in the first place. Yes, investing in safety we can feel. Thank you, Hannah. So these are the things that we're asking for. If the police were working, if this $700 million resulted in 0 homicides in the city, a handful of shootings, it would be a lot harder for us to argue that we should be defunding the police. But the fact of the matter is that that's not what we're seeing. It doesn't matter how much money we're pumping into this, we're still not getting more safety, we're still not getting fewer folks actually being harmed, actually being shot, actually being hurt. And there are things that we could do that would actually lead to that. But that thing is not going to be giving more money to the police. There are many more services in the city, many more programs that exist now or that we could create that would actually lead to more safety. And so, we're going to continue calling on council, calling on the mayor to defund the police. This fight isn't over. We're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna keep doing this until we actually do have some of those alternatives that exist. And I'm gonna wrap up because it's late, and I think there's maybe more people who are gonna talk. But thank you.
Right on. Thank you so much, Kris. So we are gonna move towards wrapping it up, just to give people a picture of what we're gonna try to do now. So we're running right up against time. So what we can do is we'll wrap up here. I'm gonna actually after Brittany and Brian talk real quick, I'm gonna wrap us up, and then and I'm gonna let everybody go because we want to respect everybody's time. But some of the speakers have volunteered to stay around to answer a couple questions. So we might just have a couple minutes to answer like 1 or 2 questions, and we'll also follow up with an email afterwards with the answers to some of the questions that have come in. Cool. So I'm gonna hand it over to Brittany to talk a little bit about what's to come this fall.
Great, I will do this quickly. Next slide, please. So I think that folks have built the case that we are living in an extremely carceral system that is not providing us with what we need to thrive. And so this fall is an extension of the work that we've seen happening in the streets and behind the scenes over the last few months, and we need to keep that energy up. Right? Like, we have the power to make change, and that's the change that we have to demand from our elected officials and from other corporations or wealthy folks who are standing in our way. So in late fall and early winter, the city will be in the process of determining what the new budget is, and there is time for us to really intervene in mid-year transfers. And so, you know, there's lots of folks who claim to be progressive on our city council. They still have the opportunity to prove that to us and transfer money. And that can come in the form of mid-year transfers. So we need to put pressure on the city's departments, on the mayor, on council to make those transfers, to defund the police, and to give us the just budget that everyone on this call has built the case for. And that's what we're demanding. So I'll just plug Act Up Philly's event. Thank you for sharing. It's tomorrow from 6 to 8. Act Up Philly and the Artists Against Abernathy are hosting another teach-in, and this is talking about how we can intervene in the hiring of the new managing director, who Brian and other folks mentioned earlier. So if somebody can just drop the link in the chat, I think that might be a great way to move us along.
Thanks, Brittany. I'm gonna kick it over to Brian to just talk about some of our next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Mo. So to help bring us home, next steps, just key thing that we'd like everyone to do is fill out this form that's linked here. We're using this form as a way to share those action steps and to know how people want to engage moving on. One of the big things we're doing, saw this as a question in the chat, tonight was recorded. We hopefully even have recordings in Spanish and in Viet, so we're going to package this along with toolkits, discussion guides. We want people to share this knowledge with people in your communities. So fill out the form so we make sure we get this stuff to you, and you can be a part of doing that. Also, members of the Alliance for a Just Philly are working on a community survey on what does the type of public safety we can all feel, the type of public safety we should be really investing in look like. And so if you fill out that form, you can let us know if you want to get that survey, and also be a part of sharing that survey with people in your community. And then finally, like Brittany was mentioning, tomorrow night's Act Up and Artists Against Abernathy event is going to be a really important one. And if you want to find out about other movement events, we curate this list, Philly We Rise, with actions that you can take, get plugged into, so we can hook you up with that. So thanks all. I will pass it back to Mo to close us out.
Yeah, that's it, folks. It's been such a rich time together. We really, really love seeing all of your faces and knowing that we're all in this together. Still going strong with more than 100 people all this time in. We you know, when we started this, we just thought it was really important that we keep the momentum going, because like Brian said earlier, this is organizing an action unlike anything that we've ever seen around the budget in recent history. So we want to keep that energy. We want to like harness all of the energy that everybody has right now and move it into the fall. So you'll see an email go out with all of the links for everything that we've talked about tonight, including the slides and the recordings. And I'm going to close this up now so that we can respect everybody's time. If you need to go, take care of your people, take care of yourself. please go do that. Some of us will stick around to answer a few questions, so you're welcome to stick around on the line. But otherwise, we love you, we appreciate you, and we thank you so much for all of the work that y'all have been doing. And we look forward to keeping that on together. Looks like we still have a bunch of people here. So I'm going to just start digging into some of the questions. Our first question that we have, and I'm gonna ask the question and let y'all, amazing speakers, organizers, learned people to step up to answer the question. So the first one is, what are the implications of the mayor's revenue projections being binding on council? I think this is a Stan question, but I will open it up to whoever is able to answer.
So the implications are that we need to be ready to push back against low revenue estimates. In the past, mayors have told us that abolishing the tax abatement will result in almost no revenue. We can't allow that kind of thing to happen while we push on council to provide revenue from good progressive sources. We have to at the same time multitask and be sure the mayor and finance director know that we're not letting them off the hook for lousy revenue estimates. So it's just another platform on which we have to fight. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah.
Or change the charter.
So.
Let me just say one thing we haven't talked about at all is whether or not we want to get involved in changing the charter to do away with some of these limitations, which make it really even harder to fight around these budget numbers. And I'm just throwing that out as something that we may want to think about at some point.
Yeah, definitely. I think this next question might also be for you. It's can they reopen the budget for reconsideration now?
Just in terms of transferring money from one department and one category to another, that's been talked about a little bit. Britt talked about that. So that's something we can do. But the top lines in terms of the amount of money that there is to spend, in toto, and how much can be spent in new ways, unless it involves a transfer ordinance. We can't do it. We cannot raise new revenue sources. That's fixed in terms of taxes anyhow. If the federal government, the federal government or the state government might possibly provide more money to the city. So if that's the case, then council will have to appropriate it and we can get involved in that process. But unless there's new money coming from other governments, we're stuck with the revenue that was appropriated in June.
And then one final question is there any chance of changing the PA Constitution to allow a progressive income/wealth tax? What would that look like?
That would look like the legislature passing an amendment in 2 different sessions and then having the voters approve. That's been a non-starter for a long time, but we should not give up on it.
What was that, Emma?
And it would probably also mean the Democrats winning the House and Senate.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably a necessary first step.
Yeah, that's, I agree.
A statewide revolution, as it were.
That too.
All right, folks, those are all the questions that I think we still have open here. There were a couple more questions that were asked in the chat, but we already saw some answers, and we will make sure that people get links to all of them. Shout out to Emily, who has been amazing at pulling all of the information out of the chat and into an email. Thank you to all of the speakers. Thank you to Brian. Thank you to Britt, Stan, Kris, Flan, Peter, Emma, Antoine. I think that's it. Thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you just for being so present, asking amazing questions. And above all, thank you so much to our amazing interpreters, Olivia, Kim, and Jeanette. You all are amazing. Yeah, so we will be in touch soon. We love you. Have a wonderful night and take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.